Okay, I want to do a series on why God allows suffering. There are so many different types of suffering that I'm going to have to break it down into several videos over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to start with the easiest one, which is starvation and world hunger. 1/3 of the entire world is starving to death. 1/3. Not to mention the other parts of the world where they may not be starving to death, but they still don't have much to eat or to live with. So if your question is, why hasn't God done anything about this? The answer is, He has done as much as He possibly could have already, and now it's in our hands. Allow me to explain what I'm talking about. Jesus came and died on the cross for anyone in the world who wants it. They can enter a relationship with Him, and they can be saved from the fires of hell, which are the ultimate sufferings. That is the ultimate suffering. Jesus came and He ended the possibility of that. So right there, the majority of suffering in the world has been ended by Christ, if you accept Him, have a relationship with Him, and do as He wants you to do. Number 2, He gave us the Holy Spirit to live inside of us. And He gave us a conscience. Those two together work in conjunction and give us guidance on how to live our lives. But a lot of us ignore this when it comes to solving world hunger, do we not? Most people do not give 10% like they're supposed to, according to the Bible, to the poor, the sick, and the suffering, like Jesus told us to. Number 3, He gave us the Bible, written instructions on how to live, part of which is to tithe, which means give 10% of your earnings toward feeding the poor and caring for the sick, etc. But instead, some of us don't, and we spend it on big houses that we don't need, and then end up having to heat them and take care of them, putting in new bathrooms, new kitchens all the time. The majority of you out there don't do this. This is people who are probably upper middle class, I would say. I don't know. I'm poor. I don't know. I don't know how people in middle class spend their money. But I do know that friends of mine who are middle class are always talking about redoing this in the house, putting on an extra room, things they don't really need. They spend them on cars that they don't need. Instead of buying a $15,000 Honda or Hyundai, they spend it on a $30,000 or $40,000 SUV that they don't need. I live on Long Island, and it's just about the flattest place in the world. What do you need an SUV for? Why do you have to have a $40,000 car? Why not spend $15,000 or even $20,000 and have $20,000 left over that you could spend to help end suffering? Dinners out, extra clothes, etc. Redoing your bathrooms, like I said, luxuries we don't really need. Jesus, in His last public address, stated that anyone who helps the suffering is helping Him. So ask yourself this question. On Christmas, Jesus' birthday, who got more, you, your relatives, or Him? Do you spend more on charities and the suffering people that need it? That is Jesus, since He said, if you help the suffering, you're helping me. Do you spend more on other people on Jesus' birthday than you do spend on Jesus? Who got more this year, you or Him? On Christmas, did you spend more for presents for people who don't need them? Is it more important to you that you buy a relative a new outfit for Christmas, or that you give the money to save a starving person's life? A vaccination to save someone from polio costs a couple dollars. Or did you have to spend $100 on an outfit for your mom? In fact, He feels so, number 4, in fact, He feels so strongly about the uncharitable people in the world who don't give to the needy, that in His last public address, which we mentioned, and I'll now tell you, is in Matthew 25. It was just before His crucifixion. You can look it up. Christ gave us the parable of the sheep and the goats, which basically stated that if you don't help the needy, you will go to hell. So don't think He doesn't care about what's going on down here if He is willing to send people He loves to hell for not helping the needy. He stated that whoever even gets a glass of water for someone in need will receive a reward in heaven, and he who helps no one will go to hell. So he set up a program of rewards and punishments, a system that would last for all eternity, according to who helps the suffering and who doesn't. So now the question becomes, God gave us all the resources in the world, and I'll explain that later, to help out the 1/3 of the world which is starving. What have we done about it? Not what has God done about it. What have we done about it? We have the means to do something about it. What have we done? That question is going to be asked of you on Judgment Day. And I'm only talking about people who are able. I understand some people who cannot help monetarily. I understand that. But they can still pray and volunteer. A very important reason God doesn't always step in and force us, for lack of a better word, to help those in need, is that to do that would really be to take away our free will and treat us like robotized lobotomy patients who do only what God says and have no real personality, have no sense of self. People who would be not made in the image of God, and therefore wouldn't need relief of suffering anyway, because they wouldn't even know they were suffering. They would just be robots. So that's not an option for God either, to turn people into robots. You see, to reduce us to that state, from the state which we are in now, with free will and a personality and the ability to choose love, the ability to love God and each other or not, it would be morally wrong to step back and let us exercise our free will and allow people to suffer. On the hierarchy of morality, it's more moral to keep us human and allow suffering than it is for God to take away our humanity and turn us into robots and end suffering. God has to do things that are most moral. He can't do anything immoral. And turning us into robots would be immoral. Let me ask you this. If you have children or relatives or loved ones, would you reduce yourself into a robotic-like creature to end world suffering and have everyone around you? If you were God, would you reduce your children, your mother, your father, your relatives, your loved ones, your boyfriends? Would you reduce them into lobotomized robots to end suffering and have them walk around like zombies, just working and living to end world suffering that wouldn't even exist anyway, because you're talking about saving robots from suffering? My guess is you wouldn't do that, and my guess is you don't know anybody who would. Finally, rather than seeing God as someone who sits up in heaven ignoring what's going on down here, see it as St. Paul does in Romans 9:22, where he talks about God sustaining and tolerating with much patience the people who deserve his wrath, such as those who don't lift a finger to help others, possibly to give them time so they can come to their senses and repent and not have to suffer an eternity in hell. Maybe his waiting for these people to turn around and start doing good is more morally acceptable than just zapping them into robots or zapping them with a bolt of lightning altogether. So you see, at this point, God's hands are tied, and so it becomes our job to help others. Let's see how we do spend our money and what our priorities are that we can't help the suffering. I'm not singling out you. I'm talking about global expenditure here, worldwide expenditure, what the people of the world are spending their money on. The United Nations states it would cost approximately $30 billion a year to solve world hunger. $30 billion a year. It sounds like a lot, but it's not. Compare that to the $1.7 trillion the world spends on the military each year. I understand nations have to protect themselves, and I agree with that. But to take $30 billion a year and solve the problem of world hunger wouldn't even make a dent in military spending. Do we really need to spend that much on weapons that kill other people? Here's another one, fast food. The only statistic I could get for this was 2004. Was from 2004, so I'm sure the numbers are much higher now. In 2004, the world spent $148.6 billion on fast food. So if we ate 20% less fast food than we do now, and gave it to the starving people in the world, we would solve world hunger 5 times over. We spend more than $140 billion a year on alcohol and illegal drugs. Again, we could save world suffering 5 times over if we didn't do that. Tobacco-related illnesses cost $500 billion per year. In 2004, we spent $40 billion a year on pornography. Put all these together and we could end world hunger like that. And we could end a lot of other problems by researching disease, more police on the streets to help out criminals, programs for women who are victims of violence, children who are abused and neglected, etc. In the whole world, there is over $46 trillion. So if everyone tithed like they were supposed to with the money God gave them, there would be 4.6, that's almost $5 trillion left over, which would still leave thousands of billions of dollars left over after spending on world hunger to spend on other forms of suffering. If we spent it in the way God intended us to, it could easily end the majority of the world's sufferings. And then there are sufferings simply because people are evil. War, crime, rape, all forms of abuse, and anything we do that is outside God's will. So if you're wondering why God isn't doing anything about ending world suffering, He is doing everything He possibly can. In the end of making us, in everything to end it short of making us robots. And just do His will devoid of any type of free will whatsoever. So you see, the problem is free will. And the problem is not even that. The problem is our free will. What do we do with it? Do we try to end world suffering? Do we volunteer to help? Do we spend our money on luxuries we don't need, or do we give it to the poor? The question is not what has God done to end world suffering. The question is, what have we done to end world suffering? Thank you. And please look for my other videos over the next couple weeks on other types of suffering. Thanks.